Hello there. The UN and the WEF must love this. The UK establishment runs our so-called two-party state as a uni-party political system, and we've just been handed more proof of it. Right now, moves are afoot to commence the handover of power from Rishi Sunak's Tories to Keir Starmer's Labour Party. Yep, no election in the offing, but the civil serpents want to get the ball rolling. They want to stop working on the plans of the elected government and start working for the opposition on the long-running assumption that if the Tories are about to lose, then Labour will get into government. There is no hint of doubt about that in their minds. And I have the suspicion they will want to craft any future government plans to dovetail in with those of the EU, the UN and the WEF, to keep the likes of Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates happy. Now, this handover thing is a long-running UK uni-party procedure. It's been going on for years, decades and longer. It is part of ensuring that when the chief executive, the Prime Minister, is changed, not much else changes as we move forward. Can you imagine getting into office to find that your international diary has already been organised to fit the views of the mandarins? That they are progressing well with preparing legislation for all the policies they agree with, but have list after list of concerns about all the policies they disagree with. And normally they get a year to prepare all of this. Yes, the whole last year of any UK administration is to be spent working on the policies of the next assumed administration, even though manifestos have not yet been published. Does that sound to you like politicians in charge or civil service mandarins with their hands on the tiller? Now many will say that it's all very sensible, making sure there are no jarring changes that could upset the smooth running of government. Sort of suggesting that we'll morph gradually from one state of affairs to the next. All for the good of the country. Sounds more to me like a system being run for the benefit of those inside it who are anxious to prevent any sort of change, let alone a jarring shock. Now in the US, the elections occur and then later, after 11 weeks, the new president is sworn in. That's the handover phase. Whereas in the UK, elections are called, but although the Parliament is dissolved, the PM and ministers remain in place to deal with any emergencies until the election results are in. And the new PM has kissed the hand of the monarch. That's a handover of power at a sprint. Presumably why the civil service are keen to get the ball rolling even before we know the date of the next general election. Now, in the past, one assumes the country had sufficient trust in the system to be comfortable with this. But I'm afraid trust in our political system across the board is now threadbare thin. Can we trust our civil servants to conduct such a handover without any pro-EU, net zero or woke bias? I, for one, can not. And maybe Rishi Sunak can't either, because he's the one preventing the talks between Keir Starmer from commencing with the civil service. He refused after the Cabinet Secretary Simon Case recently asked him to allow him to talk to the Labour leader. Now, if a Tory to Labour and vice versa handover is to last a year every 5 years, then that means 20% of the civil service time is potentially spent on working for politicians who have not been put into government yet. And it also leads me to wonder if one of the most privately vocal bodies against proportional representation is in fact the civil service. After all, they want a quiet, ordered life. Can you imagine them waking up to the shock election of a Geert Wilders equivalent in the UK? Enough to give any mandarin the vapours. Oh, and just to remind you, David Cameron refused the civil service permission to prepare for an EU referendum leave vote. Part of the reason the UK stumbled a lot during the UK-EU talks. That, of course, was not a cynical, just-in-case decision by Cameron, was it? He wasn't trying to set a Brexit UK up to fail if we did decide to vote for leave, was he? Although in hindsight maybe he did us a favour. I dread to think what the civil serpents would have drafted had they been working unhindered for a year on a leave plan. Now, when Tony Blair took office for the first time all those years ago, do you remember Gordon Brown dropping the bombshell that the Bank of England would take power from politicians over monetary policy, the power to set interest rates? Given this political power handover procedure between parties, I would assume that the civil service knew this was coming. But the voters did not. And I also wonder how many other people were also aware but kept quiet. It doesn't matter whether or not it was a good thing to do, the voter surely should have known. Anyway, we're all now well aware of how so-called woke, progressive and inclusive our civil serpentry is. The woke bias of the civil service is no longer hidden. The pretense of non-bias is tissue thin, and they no longer care that we realise it. So I have to wonder how many blockades they intend to put in front of any moves by Keir Starmer to limit legal and illegal immigration, for example, if he actually has any real plans to do so. And if he has any plans at all that even hints at increasing public sector productivity, well, they'll no doubt hit the buffers very early on as well. But plans to cosy up to the European Union will be given the rush, action this day, go ahead, with draft legislation probably including going the whole hog, like joining the EU Army PESCO setup in full and the single market, as well as handing over Gibraltar to the EU and Spain. You get the idea. Be in no doubt the civil service will be trying to push the new Labour administration into following their woke agenda. And as an example of the civil service thinking, here's what GB News reported a couple of days ago. Former civil servant Simon MacDonald has been accused of trading away our strengths after suggesting the UK should hand the EU its Security Council seat. This is the civil servant that told his civil service mates that he voted for remaining in the EU, despite the requirement for civil servants to keep their political opinions to themselves. And he's since been rewarded with a seat in the House of Lords. Now, I have a better idea. France, as a member of the EU, should hand its seat on the Security Council over. That makes far more sense. And MacDonald, along with John Kerr and Sir Peter Westmacott, who both ran the UK Embassy in Washington, are now warning that a second Trump presidency is very likely and is a massive danger to the UK, and that secret plans must be drawn up with other allies to deal with him. Sounds to me like these jokers don't have any trust in the currently appointed diplomats to do their job properly advising the government. Or maybe it's the current crop of diplomats who contacted them asking for help in getting some anti-Trump action in play as soon as possible. Or are they hoping to get the private ear of Keir Starmer before he takes office? But one of them, Westmacott, is quoted in the newspaper as saying, "There's not much point in saying, we know he's a monster, he's unprincipled, he's a misogynistic fraud and liar and destroyer of constitutions. The reality is he will be there. We have to find ways of engaging with the US if Trump is elected." Very diplomatic coming from a former ambassador, isn't it? Now, I do have to wonder if their concerns really are about national security, or whether they are terrified that Trump might actually quickly come to a free trade deal with the UK. Now, that is something that would cause a pro-EU civil service meltdown. isn't it?